Greetings one and all. Welcome to Super Wednesdays here on the Holy Hilltop in the Holy Land. Holy time. We are on the 18th day of the month of Tevet 5780. Today's class, Good Samaritans? Question mark. Oh really? Question mark. Okay, we'll give a no longer than 5-minute summary of last week's first part. We spoke about how there is a movement, there's an effort on the part of the Shomron, the Samaria Jewish Council, to put the Samaritans back on the map, to give them a facelift, to glorify them, to make them kosher. In the last couple of years, buses from all over Israel coming on the holidays, in the intermediate holidays of Passover and the holiday of the booths, Sukkot. We saw that there were 3 stages of the exile of the 10 lost tribes. And after that, we see that the king of Assyria, who was the one responsible for the exile of the 10 tribes, he brought in various nations. The biggest nation that he brought in was a nation called Kuta, or the Kutim. And when they came to the land of Israel, many of them were devoured by wild animals, including lions. And the king asked one of the Kohanim, the priest, the Jewish priest, to give an explanation, why is this happening? And the priest explained that the land of Israel is a holy land, and it is not willing to accept upon its midst those that are not circumcised, or those that do not keep the 7 commandments of Noah. So the Jews sent 2 scholars, 2 sages, in order to circumcise and teach the 7 commandments to the Samaritans through the Kutim. And there was a dispute for 600 years by the sages whether the Samaritans were actually Jewish or not Jewish, because in fact they converted out of fear of being devoured by wild animals. So this dispute went on until after 6 centuries. Eventually they were excommunicated from the Jewish people. They are Gentiles like any other nation, any other Gentiles. The so-called Good Samaritans, where we checked them out last week, and we saw throughout history they have been a thorn in the side of the Jewish people, to say the least. That's putting it nicely. They have terrorized the Jewish people. It all started out in the time of the Second Temple, when the Jewish people came back to rebuild the temple in the time of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was terrorized politically and physically, along with the Jewish people, after King Cyprus allowed the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel and to reestablish the Second Temple. For 35 years, this continued. The temple was, through the merit, quote-unquote, of the Samaritans, they were able, after a year, to stop the building of the Second Temple. This freeze went on for 18 to 20 years. After that, the Jewish people returned once again in the time of Darius II, and they built the temple in 4 years. Afterwards, a year later, Ezra, the scribe, comes back. He's attacked by 180,000 troops of the Samaritans that come to do war against the Jewish people and to try to eliminate the Jewish presence in the land of Israel and, of course, in Jerusalem, the temple. 12 years later, we have Nehemiah. He comes back to the land of Israel in order to fortify the city of Jerusalem, which was constantly being under attack by nations, and also, of course, the Samaritans. The Samaritans, in fact, tried to assassinate the Jewish leader Nehemiah, believe it or not. So we see the Good Samaritans, how kind they were to the Jewish people after the Jewish people circumcised them free of charge and taught them Torah free of charge. Tremendous appreciation, one might say. This went on, like I said, for about 35 years during the time of the beginning of the establishment of the Second Temple. The next stage we see of the terror and the war of the Samaritans against the Jewish people. This was in the year 310 BCE. The Alexander the Great cuts a three-way deal with the Samaritans. Alexander the Great had difficulties in conquering the city of Tyre, which is in the northern part of Lebanon, and he made a three-way deal with the Samaritans that they would join his army and help conquer the city of Tyre. In return, they would receive two prizes. Number one, they would receive a temple on the mountain of Gerizim, which is above the city of Nablus Shechem. Number two, Alexander the Great, would help the Samaritans fight against the Jewish people and destroy the Second Temple. The Samaritans were successful in assisting Alexander the Great, and he conquered the city of Tyre. Later on, coming back in order to keep his part of the agreement, they went and they set up a temple on the mountain of Gerizim above the city of Nablus. And then it was payback time still for the Samaritans, and they're on the way to Jerusalem on the 25th day of Tevet. This year it comes out on January 22nd, 2020. And a day that was supposed to be the destruction of the temple and destruction of Jerusalem turned out to be actually a national holiday of the Jewish people, where it all turned around. The king, Alexander the Great, sees Shimon the righteous coming his way. The Jews got word of the plan of the Samaritans to destroy Jerusalem and the temple, and a whole entire delegation of the Jewish people, led by Shimon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, came and met him halfway, and they began to, and Alexander the Great bowed down to Shimon the righteous, and they asked, the Samaritans were freaking out, what are you bowing down to this Jew? Every time, Alexander the Great said, every time I'm victorious in battle, I see this Jew before me, and then I know that I'm going to be victorious. Anyways, word gets out by the king that the Samaritans are after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and then a total turnaround, measure for measure, what the Samaritans intended to do to the Jewish people and to Jerusalem and to the temple, what was done actually to them. Their temple on Mount Gerizim was destroyed. This all happened on the 25th day of Tevet. There was revenge against the Samaritans and their temple and their mountain. Turned out to be a holiday for many, many years during the time of the Second Temple. Okay, that was last week. Moving right along here. The Samaritans, during the time of the Second Temple, continued their harassment and terrorism against the Jewish people. The Jewish people, one of the 613 commandments for us in our Torah is that we must sanctify the new moon once a month. It's called Kiddush HaChodesh. And there was a special way of communication in those days in order to get the word out to the entire Jewish people. Some of them were not in Israel, in the land of Israel, to get it outside the land of Israel, the message, what day will be the new month, what day will be Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month. So they would, certain mountains in the land of Israel, the Jewish people would go up and they would set a bonfire, and then another mountain, when they would see the fire going up on this certain mountain, they knew that tomorrow was going to be the new month, Rosh Chodesh, and therefore they lit a bonfire, and this kept on going from mountain to mountain to mountain. When the Samaritans learned of this communication, funky type of communication the Jewish people had in order to fulfill the commandment of blessing the new month, the new moon, the new month. So therefore, when they got wind of it, they began to go up to these certain mountaintops, and they would put out the fire. So the Jewish people would not know that it's actually the new month. So after this happened a couple of times, Jewish people had to reorganize and regroup, and it was abolished. This type of communication was abolished due to the terrorism of the Samaritan community, the Samaritan people. This could be, this story is brought down in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, the new year. It's in chapter 2, the second Mishnah, where this story that I told is brought down. So from that, when the Samaritans began terrorizing the communication system of the Jewish people, they had to come up with another way to announce the coming of the new month. Another type of terrorism against the Jewish people was always on the holiday of Passover. The Samaritans would come to Jerusalem and they would throw dead bones of people into the temple in order to make the temple impure. And in order to stop the Paschal sacrifice. The Samaritans, as we will see soon, the Samaritans would celebrate Passover, but their idea was that the chosen mountain was not Jerusalem, but it was Mount Gerizim, above the city of Nablus, above the city of Shechem. So this is brought down, these stories of the Samaritans around Passover time going day in and day out and throwing in dead people's bones in order to make the temple impure. This is brought down to contaminate the temple. This is brought down in the book of Josephus, Wars 2, chapter 12, the whole story of this. Moving along in history, so we're still in the time of the Second Temple. So far we've seen the communications to announce the beginning of the Jewish month was destroyed by the Samaritans. We see many times for Passover, Jews could not sacrifice the Passover sacrifice due to the contamination of the temple by the Samaritans. This is all happening in the time of the Second Temple. Moving along to the story of Hanukkah, which is in the year 135 BCE, the Samaritans are also very prevalent in the story of Hanukkah. The Samaritans decided to send a declaration to the king, Antiochus, the king of the Greek Syrians, and they wrote the following in the declaration. I summarize it. Number 1, we are not Jews. Number 2, we do not recognize the God of the Hebrews. Number 3, we were coerced to keep the Sabbath and Jewish holidays. 4, if you prefer us, King Antiochus, if you prefer that we return to our old ways, we shall. And in the end, that's exactly what they did. Can you imagine this? The Jewish people are being terrorized by the Greek Syrians. There are, for 3.5 years, there are decrees against many of the Jewish commandments. Jews are being killed left and right. And instead of standing up for the Jewish people who assisted them to convert and teach them and circumcise them, this is the gratitude, continued gratitude in the time of the Second Temple that we see by the good Samaritans, yak. Not only did the Samaritans not assist the Jewish people, actually they joined forces with the Greek Syrians in order to fight against the Jewish people at the time of Hanukkah. So next year, it's a little bit late now, but next year, remember, when you're celebrating Hanukkah, also celebrate the fact that the victory not only over the Greeks, but also over the Samaritans. Believe it or not, even after the Jewish victory in the time of Hanukkah, the Samaritans continued to incite and fight against the Jewish people in the land of Israel at the time of the Second Temple. This could be all found. My sources are the following. In the book of the Maccabees, the book number 2, or Maccabees, book number 1, chapter 3, verse 10, or Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 6. In the book called Kadmoniot, chapter 12, verse 5, you could see all the time period of the Hanukkah miracle and the Hanukkah battle, when we were under terrible decrees by the Greek Syrians. You could read about it in those sources. Check it out. Now, it's very interesting that the Good Samaritans, like all other good religions, have what we call a replacement theory. If you look at the Christians, they don't disagree that the Jewish people were once the chosen people and they were God's chosen people. However, because of the fact that the Jewish people went OTD, off the derech, they went off the path, therefore now we are the chosen people. The Christians are the chosen people. The Muslims have the same replacement theory. Instead of Isaac being bound up and the altar on Mount Moriah, it was actually, believe it or not, it was Ishmael, right? The head of Islam, Ishmael. He was the one. So there's always these replacements there, and the Samaritans were no different. We see, for example, different names that the Samaritans called themselves. 3 names. Number 1, they called themselves the Shomrim, the guardians. The guardians of they were the true guardians of the Torah, of the law of God. The true guardians. Number 2, they called themselves the children of Israel. The children of Israel. Today there's black Hebrews and all kinds of interesting Hebrews. So the Samaritans called themselves the children of Israel. Not the Jewish people are the children of Israel, they are. And last but not least, they called themselves the children of Joseph. In fact, whenever somebody, until this very day, when you come up to the Samaritans and if you call them Samaritans or if you call them Kutim, it's an offense. It's like, I guess it's they would call it the C word, Kutim, the C word, or the S word, Shomronim, the Samaritans, the S word, they're very offended by that because they say we are the children of Israel or we are the children of Joseph, or sometimes they claim they are the priests, they are the Levites. So there's an interesting source that we have where one of our sages, a famous sage of ours, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir passed away on the first day, not too long ago, on the first day of the month of Tevet, according to many of our sources. That is when Rabbi Meir of the Talmud passed away. Of course, his wife was a famous woman. Her name was Bruria, a very, very, also a tremendous scholar in her own right. So, maybe Rebbetzin Yemima Mizrahi is a reincarnation of this Bruria gal. Anyways, if you look in Breshit Rabbah, chapter 94, paragraph 6, an amazing story. Rabbi Meir is walking and he runs into one of these Samaritans. And Rabbi Meir says, "Who are you?" And he says, he is from the tribe of Joseph. He is from the tribe of Joseph. And Rabbi Meir says, "No, no, no, you are not. You are not from the tribe of Joseph. You are actually from the tribe of Yisachar." And the Samaritan looks confused. "I'm not from the tribe of Joseph. I'm from the tribe of Yisachar. Maybe it sounds still good." So he says, "How is that?" He says, "Well, if you look in the Torah, in the portion of Vayigash in Genesis, you'll see that it says that one of the children of Issachar, his name was Shomron. Shomron, it sounds similar, you know? So he says, "You know what? You're really," Rabbi Meir tells the Samaritan, "you're really from the tribe of Issachar." So very confused, this Samaritan goes back to his priest, the Samaritan priest, and he tells him about this unusual conversation. You know, he looks complexed. So what happened? He says, "I ran into one of the Jewish sages, and he told me that I'm not from the tribe of Joseph." You know, Joseph, their inheritance is near the city of Nablus. So that's where the Samaritans have their temple, and that's where they reside, on the mountain of Gerizim. So that's how they picked up, as hitchhikers, they picked up the idea that, so to speak, they're from the tribe of Joseph. So the priest of the Samaritans tells him, "Listen, Rabbi Meir gave you a 1-2 punch." "How's that?" the Samaritan said. "I'll tell you, because number one, he proved that you were not from the tribe of Joseph. That's the first punch. The second punch was that you're not from Yisachar either, because there's no such person, a child of Yisachar. His name is Shomron. The area here of the Shomron is named after a king, after a Gentile king who owned the area named Shemer. It has nothing to do with Shomron. So Rabbi Meir really gave you a 1-2 TKO knockout, and you're not from Joseph, we're not from Joseph, and we're not from Yisachar either." So this is the replacement theory. And not only do the Samaritans till this day have a replacement theory that they are really the guardians of God's law, and they are the people, children of Israel, the tribe of Joseph, but they also have a replacement theory as far as geography is concerned. How's that? Because the Samaritans replaced what it says in our Torah, that the chosen mountain is Jerusalem, the holy city is Jerusalem, where the temple and our sacrifice and where we come close to God will be on the Temple Mount, on Mount Moriah. According to the Samaritans, Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, they call it, till this day, they call it the mountain of trash, the mountain of sewage. Can you believe that? The gall, the chutzpah of the Samaritans. Not only that, folks, they placed in their forged book, which they call the Torah, it is in their 10 commandments they put in a new commandment, one of the 10. You might not find this. I know there was some judge in America that he had the Ten Commandments that he placed in the courtroom, and then there was a big uproar, and there was a big commotion, and there was a court order that he had to eliminate it. I don't know exactly how that played out in the end, but there was you'll have to, clean your glasses for this one, because it don't say that. So the Samaritans put in that one of the Ten Commandments is that you shall choose the mountain of Gerizim, of course, as the chosen place to sacrifice to God. That's one of their 10 commandments. So, interesting that the Samaritans, besides calling Jerusalem the mountain of trash and sewage, they also call it the cursed mountain. Jerusalem is the cursed mountain. So they changed around totally this place of worship, the chosen place for the Jewish people. This became now Mount Gerizim above the city of Nablus. In fact, we are told in Tanchuma, Vayikra 1, very interesting, if there happens to be a cantor, a leader of the prayers in your synagogue, and he omits the paragraph in our prayers which talk about returning to Jerusalem, you might think that the Reform movement, they were the first ones to remove from their prayer books any mention of Jerusalem, because they wanted to eliminate any mention to Jerusalem, not so the Gentiles would not think that we have dual loyalty to another country, Jerusalem. So they eliminated any memory of Jerusalem. So if you hear a leader of the prayers, he omits that paragraph of prayers that says, God, please return us to the holy city of Jerusalem and bring us back to the worship of the holy temple. If somebody omits that, you must remove him immediately from being the leader of the prayers. Why? Because this person is a Samaritan. This person is a Shomroni, and he does not believe in Jerusalem as being our holiest place and the Temple Mount being in Jerusalem, and therefore he is considered to be a denier, a scoffer of Torah, and therefore you must remove him immediately, just like tackle him, whatever needs to be done, tackle him and choose somebody else to be. So it's an amazing thing. The Reform, they must have learned this from the original reformers. The original reformers are the Samaritans, of course. Not only that, it is listed in our sources in Breshit Rabbah 32:10 or Breshit Rabbah 81:3. Check it out. Very interesting stories. Sages were on the way to pray in Jerusalem. They were on the way to pray during the time of the Second Temple. They were on their way to pray in Jerusalem, or perhaps even sages after Jerusalem was destroyed, because as Rabbi Ovadia Yosef brings down in his Jewish law book, that till this very day, even though we do not have the temple, it is still a commandment 3 times a year for a Jew to go up to Jerusalem, to the old city where the western wall is, in that area, and one fulfills still the commandment of 3 times a year a Jew must make the hike up to Jerusalem and to the area of the Temple Mount. So Jews were on their way to pray in Jerusalem, sages, and they were stopped by the Samaritans. And they said, where are you going? They said, we're going to pray in the most special place, in the most holy place to pray, which is, of course, the city of Jerusalem. They said, what are you talking about? Why should you make such a, you have to go, think about it. Nablus to the city of Jerusalem is approximately 80 or 90 kilometers. That's one heck of a way. They said, why don't you pray here? This is really our mountain, the mountain of Gerizim, above the city of Nablus, Shechem. This is the real holy place. This is the best place to to pray. And in fact, a few of the sages they would try to kill because they were offended that the Jews were going up to Jerusalem to pray instead of their so-called holy mountain of Mount Gerizim. In fact, it says in the tractate of Nidarim, of vows, the 3rd chapter, the 10th Mishnah, that if somebody takes a vow that I do not want to receive any benefit from those going up 3 times a year to Jerusalem for the holidays, I do not want to receive any benefit for them. So a person made an oath. What happens to a Samaritan? Let's say a Samaritan is, you meet up a Samaritan and he has a great sale. He has a great sale. You know, he's opening up a Walmart store or one of these real cheap stores, and you want to buy something from him, but you said, well, you know, maybe the person is Jewish. As I said, for 600 years there was a dispute whether these people were Jewish or not. So are you allowed to receive benefit? Are you allowed to go to this Samaritan's store and receive benefit from all the sales in his store? So the Mishnah tells us no problem. Why? Because the fact that the Samaritans do not go up 3 times a year to the city of Jerusalem, to the holy Mount Moriah. They go up 3 times a year to Mount Gerizim above the city of Nablus. So there's no problem. You're allowed to go into their store and and enjoy their sales. Maimonides, first Tosfot read on this Mishnah. He writes the following amazing thing. Says that we know that not a day goes by where the Samaritans, when they pass by Jerusalem, do not stone the city of Jerusalem. You know, like, amazing thing, like you're looking at people and they're starting throwing stones, but they're not throwing stones at people, they're throwing stones at a city. So not a day goes by. This is the Tosfot read on this, in the Tractate of Vows. This happens every single day because the Samaritans, he writes, do not acknowledge the city of Jerusalem. Maimonides goes on to, at the same tractate, same Mishnah, and he says that it is known. It is a known and publicized fact that the Samaritans despise the city of Jerusalem and curse it out every single day. This is an amazing thing, because think about these Jews. There are Jews during the holidays, Passover and Sukkot, that have either they have no pride or they're ignoramuses. So we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know. They haven't listened to this class, but they better start listening to this class. Can you imagine? We are going up. We are giving revenue. We are giving tourism. We are giving our money. We are giving a facelift. We are glorifying these Samaritans. When? During a time where they refused to go up to Jerusalem. It is a slap in the face to the holy city of Jerusalem. Any Jew that participates in this disgrace of going up to the mountain of Gerizim on the Jewish holidays, where they are going up there and sacrificing their Paschal lamb, and people are taking pictures of it. Oh, it's such a, wow, it's so nostalgic. This is a tremendous disgrace. This is a tremendous Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. Because these people are up there doing what they are because they deny Jerusalem. They deny the holiness of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. There was a famous Jewish traveler. His name was Benjamin of Tudela. In fact, my father of blessed memory, when he moved to the land of Israel some 21 years ago, I found him an apartment on the street of Benjamin Mitudela in Jerusalem. And Benjamin from Tudela, he lived from 1130 to 1173, only 43 years old. He was an amazing person, this Benjamin. He was able to travel through 3 continents in a short span of maybe 5 or 6 years. He went through Africa, Asia, and also Europe. In fact, Benjamin Binyamin of Tudela preceded Marco Polo 100 years in his description of what he saw in Asia. 100 years before Marco Polo. So one of his journeys was he was in Egypt. And he has a book about his travels. In fact, some modern day Israeli musicians have made a song or two about his travels throughout the world. So he's a famous person worldwide. And many historians rely 100% on his descriptions of different places in the world. So we're talking about almost 900 years ago. And he writes, when he was in Cairo, there were 50 families, 50 Samaritan families that lived in Cairo, and 3 times a year they would leave Egypt and they would go not to Jerusalem for the holidays. No, they would go to Nablus, to the mountain of Gerizim, and that's where they would sacrifice their sacrifices 3 times a year. Number 2, he writes there that besides for their 3 times going up to Mount Gerizim 3 times a year, they also worshipped idols. Very interesting, because also in the time of the Talmud, they found when the sages were investigating to see whether the Samaritans were really true blue converts or not, they found various idol worshipping up on the mountain of Gerizim. And now think about it. We're talking about 1,000 years plus later. Benjamin of Tudela is telling us that they worship idols at the same time. And last but not least, they have an interesting Sabbath. How do they observe Sabbath? They bring in the Sabbath on Friday at noon, and they finish the Sabbath on Saturday at noon. This is very interesting. So they start on the Muslim Friday, and they continue and they do a half day of a Jewish Sabbath until noon time. Anyways, this is the testimony of Benjamin of Tudela in his trip in 1100s of the Samaritans. The son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his name is of course Rav Elazar, and he writes in the tractate of Sotah, page 37, side B, says very interesting. He went up to a certain Samaritan and he said, you people are tremendous forgers of the Torah. Interesting statement. Why? Because according to professional people that have checked the Samaritan so-called Torah, so-called holy book, there are 6,000, if you could believe it, put on a seatbelt, 6,000 mistakes in their so-called holy book. 6,000. So now you can understand, when in the Talmud, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, calls them forgers, you can understand what he's talking about. Besides, we spoke about one of the 10 commandments has all of a sudden become that one of the 10 commandments is to go up to establish a temple on the mountain of Gerizim. So it's an amazing thing. Not only that, if you go up today to the Samaritans, the forgers, the scoffers, the deniers, you will see there's a commandment to have on the doorpost, you have a mezuzah, a little scroll on the side of the door, on the right side of the door. So what do? It says in the oral law that you're supposed to place this, the words of the mezuzah, supposed to place them on your doorpost. So what do? You could see pictures if you look. You could see their homes if you're traveling there, that above the house, they write out the entire, what it says in the paragraph of Shema. It's written out on the building, you look at a Jew, they have it on the doorpost, because of course the Samaritans do not believe in the oral law. So if you only have the written law is one big dead end. There is nothing operative you could do with the written law. Even simple things that look simple to us are not at all. For example, a person must honor their parents. Well, if the parents say, listen, I'm in debt right now, can you pull the trigger so, I don't want to have to face this, I'm going to have to perhaps sit in prison, or I don't want to be in debt. Can you pull the trigger on me? Well, if you want to honor your parents, you better pull that trigger, because they're asking you to honor them by pulling the trigger and killing them. Of course, we know in the oral law, it says that if your parents ask you to do something that is against the Torah, you're not allowed to listen to your parents. So it's a no-go. It's a lose-lose situation, just the written law. Now you'll see here the picture that I have here of the booths on the Sukkot. Look at the way that first of all, the Samaritans, they have their sukkah inside the house. They make it in the house, which is, of course, if you have the oral law, you're not allowed to do that. And number two, look at the branches that they put above their sukkah. You'll see it's fruit, various types of fruits that they put up there, which of course is not Jewish law, that it holds no water. So check out that picture.
You can make schach out of fruit?
No. Okay, so the bottom line is that after seeing the picture and understanding what we're talking about today, these Samaritans they preceded the reform and conservative movements by 1,000+ years. They do not believe in the oral law. Imagine this. We know that there is the NFL. We've heard of the NBA. We've heard of the Supreme Court. Imagine a group of people waking up one day and saying, listen, we are the NFL. And you know how we play now? I'll tell you how we play. And they change all the rules that have been in the last 100 years. I know that this year the Chicago Bears celebrated their 100th anniversary in the NFL. So I don't know how long before there was NFL before the Bears, but I imagine they were one of the first groups. So imagine this. There are 100 years of laws of NFL. There's a whole book of laws of the NFL. And a group of people come by one day and say, no, we are the real NFL. We are the real NFL. And they get their cameras out and they start having their games. And the rules are totally different. Think about the NBA. The NBA. Instead, right, you're not allowed to travel. So now it's no problem. You could keep on walking 100 steps and just keep on walking. And they change around the entire rule book of the NBA. Can you imagine that? These people would be run out of town. Supreme Court. They have their gigantic books. You walk into a lawyer, God Almighty, like all these books that are behind them, these law books. You have to know, like, paragraph number 5736B. And they have all these law books because they have to check out the law. Somebody comes, a group of people come one day and say, no, we are the Supreme Court. We are the Supreme Court. And here's our law book. And they change around all these laws. Is somebody going to buy that? Imagine that. Well, welcome, applaud, reform, conservative, Samaritans. Same thing. Just like they would be tossed out on their blanks, that is how they have been tossed out of Judaism, the Samaritans. Okay, a few interesting stats on the Samaritans. According to some historians, around the time of the Bible, or the Torah, there were 1 million Samaritans in the world. Pretty amazing. 1 million Samaritans. Where is that? Okay. According to other opinion, up until the year 400, there were 1 million Samaritans in the world. Amazing. Why? Because let me give you some statistics of the last 130 years. Check this out. Amazing. In 1838, there were 150 Samaritans near the city of Nablus. In 1901, there were 152 Samaritans. In the time of the British Mandate, when they counted the population, a census of the population, in 1922, there were 163 Samaritans, 83 men and 80 women. In 1948, there were 250 Samaritans, 192 in the city of Nablus, 58 in Tel Aviv, and eventually they left Tel Aviv and moved to a city not too far called Holon. In 1969, there were 414 Samaritans. In 1997, there were 595 Samaritans. In 2003, there were 654 Samaritans. Amongst them were 30 Jewish women. What a disgrace. 30 Jewish women. According to statistics in the year 2007, 30 more Jewish women joined and married Gentile Samaritans. So it's an amazing, in the year 2007, there were 700 Samaritans. In 2008, 750 Samaritans left Amazing. From 1 million, God has punished them for all their deceit, forgery, for all their desecration of God's name and God's city of Jerusalem and God's temple. They have paid tremendous, amazing, from 1 million people down. And also, going back to all our Jewish tourists with smiles on their face and cameras on their neck, taking pictures and having a great time and buying at the stores and buying at the food stores of the Samaritans and giving them, a livelihood. 60 Jewish women. 60 Jewish women with these Samaritans. Amazing. They number 750 people. Of the 750, 60 of them are Jewish. Assimilation. And we have no pride. Or maybe we're just ignorant. But that is pretty disgusting. To go and to kudzi up and to go hugging these Samaritan lowlifes. You might have heard the expression, the Good Samaritans. Where's that from? Good Samaritans, yeah. That comes from Luke 10:25 to 29. A question was asked to JC, who is my neighbor? JC replies, a certain man was going down, listen closely, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell amongst robbers, who both stripped him and beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. By chance, a certain priest was going down that way. When he saw him, he passed on to the other side of the road. In the same way, a Levite, also when he came down to the same place, saw him. This guy who was robbed and half dead passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he traveled, came where he was. When he saw him, he moved with compassion, came to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denaries, that's a dinar in Hebrew, a type of coin, and gave it to the host and said to him, please take care of him. Whatever you spend beyond that, I will repay you when I return to your inn. Now, JC is talking now. Now, which of these 3 do you think seemed to be a neighbor to him who fell amongst the robbers? They all answered, he who showed mercy on him. Then JC said to him, go and do likewise. Now, this is in Luke. But if you look in various editions of this story, you can look it up on the internet, very interesting. In many places you'll find the following change of the story. A good Samaritan is a person who does good deeds out of compassion and not because of any hope of reward. The term Good Samaritan is derived from a parable told by JC in the book of Luke in the New Testament. In the parable, a Jew is robbed. Remember, we said a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and was robbed and beaten half to death. Now he becomes a Jew. Then he was left on the side of the road to die. After the injured Jew is passed up by a priest and a Levite, a man from Samaria, also known as a Samaritan, finds the Jew and helps him. This was a surprising turn of events because JC tells us that the Jews and Samaritans did not like one another. So even though Samaritans do not like the Jews and the Jews don't like Samaritans, this good Samaritan helped out this Jew. Very interesting that in Luke, you look at it, he was not Jewish. Anyways, dear folks, Good Samaritans. We've had 2 classes on the Good Samaritans, beginning from the time of the beginning of the Second Temple, in the times of Zerubbabel, going on to the time of Ezra, continuing in the time of Nehemiah, to continuing in the time of Alexander the Great, the time of Hanukkah, the time of the second temple. And we've seen the good Samaritans. Anything to make the Jews look bad. A priest comes by and a Levite, very interesting, and they walk to the other side of the street. Do you think that really happened? A Jew sees somebody on the side of the street, no matter who he is, and nobody's there, and you just walk away? Does that sound like a Jewish thing to do? You walk on the other side of the street. No, that's not Jewish at all. But anything to paint the Jews and the rabbis and the leaders, anything they will do in the New Testament to paint the rabbis and the Levites and the priests in a bad light and lift up the Samaritans. Because if you think about it, the Samaritans and the Christians have a common denominator. They both hate the oral law. They both hate the sages of the Jewish people, the leaders of the Jewish people. So don't believe for 1 second this jive story about the good Samaritan. Final words for today. Okay, Maimonides writes in Tractate Blessings, chapter 8, the 8th Mishnah. Listen to what he writes. Whatever you see in the Torah, in the oral law, when it looks like there's an advantage to the Samaritans, where we could perhaps include them in prayers or in when we eat, this was talking about the earlier generations when there was still a question mark to whether they were Jewish or not. However, when it was finalized by our sages that the Samaritans are not Jews, they are Gentiles. Not only are they Gentiles, but they are worse than Gentiles. Imagine that. Maimonides, progressive Maimonides, the compassion Maimonides. He tells it like it is. Good Samaritans got to be pulling my leg. Good Samaritans, they are worse than the nations of the world. Those are the words of Maimonides. In the book of Ben Sirah, on page 111, book of Ben Sirah, he writes about two nations that he cannot stand, and a third which is not a nation, which are impostors. Who are they? Who are they? The two nations that he despises are the nations of Seir, which is an offshoot of the Edomites, and the Philistines. But who is this third people that are not really a nation, and he despises them? Those are the lowlifes. These are his words, Naval, that live above the city of Nablus, above the city of Shechem. That's what he had to say about these people. And last but not least, in the words of Yosef from Qumran, is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in the northern part of the Dead Sea. Here's what he has to say about this, about the Samaritans. These lowlifes that build their mountain, build their altars on the mountain of Gerizim in order in order to incite against the Jewish people, as if there is a different Jerusalem, another Jerusalem on Mount Gerizim. So those were his kind words for the Good Samaritans. So dear folks, with God's help, I hope to pass on in this video, at the end here, some numbers to call. Number 1, this magazine. Number 2, the Shomron Council, the Jewish Shomron Council, to put the pressure on them to cancel these periodic tours up to Mount Gerizim, to the Samaritans, to put pressure on them to cancel that. So we'll leave you that information at the end of this video. Till next week. Keep the faith.